Hello and welcome to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar, helping you optimize your mindset and live your best life. Now, I know that through life's challenges, it can be certainly very difficult to feel like you're living your best life when you're in the depths of despair. And of course, most people have experienced loss of some kind, whether that's loss of a job and you're grieving that job and the loss of your identity, or the loss of a pet, a relationship. You may be right now experiencing divorce, going through that. And even if you knew that things were not perfect, it still can be such a dramatic and traumatic experience to grieve that loss of that. And certainly the level of grief that can come through losing a loved one can be so heartbreaking and debilitating emotionally and sometimes even physically, that it can feel really tough and like you're stuck and that you'll never be able to sort of move forward. And you wonder if, how is that possible and why do I feel stuck? Well, my guest on today's show was asking herself that exact question. And how do I seem to be stuck after experiencing the death of her 27-year-old son to a heroin overdose? Unimaginable to hear that news. And what's extraordinary about my guest is that she was able to transmute her grief into a way that served her in order to be able to live with grief. We're going to dive deep into the conversation. We certainly have a lot to talk about. We are going to talk about, the process of healing. We're going to talk about, how to incorporate self-compassion through that journey, and even talking about some of the guilt associated with, losing a loved one. And also something really cool and unique is we're going to talk about using ancient practices to really help through that grieving process. So I want to welcome author Karen V. Johnson. She is the author of Living Grieving. It's using energy medicine to alchemize grief and loss. And Karen, by the way, was a former federal law judge practicing criminal law for over 30 years. She's also a former Army officer and a master practitioner of energy medicine. So such a unique journey. So hello and welcome, Karen V. Johnson. Karen, it is such a pleasure to have you here on the Mindset Mentor.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to commend you and applaud you, first of all, and acknowledge you for, being vulnerable and opening up and taking on this, all of us on this beautiful journey with you through your book. You experience, extreme depths of despair to the point of, not wanting to live, and to be able to transmute that is so inspiring for all the listeners out there and the people who are going to watch the video as well, to know that yes, you can get past that horrible feeling of feeling stuck and as though you'll never be happy again. So I want to go to the beginning, Karen, and to the point when you received the news and you heard that your son Ben had died of a heroin overdose. What was that like?
Yeah, that was so I was actually in South Korea and I was on vacation. And I knew that when I came back, we were going to have a big talk because he was struggling. He tried being an entrepreneur and selling life insurance and doing things, but he didn't want to go to college. And so he's in college, but he was a little bit older, just not feeling, settled, like anything was happening. And so I was in South Korea and I got the call toward the evening, late afternoon, evening, and someone called my phone and then hung up. And I just had this bad feeling all day, just bad feeling. And so then the person I called them back and it was a detective that answered. And he said, "Is this Mrs. Johnson?" "Yes, this is Mrs. Johnson. And so can you tell me what's going on?" So I thought maybe he was in an accident. I immediately thought of my son, Ben, because I knew he was struggling. It was an accident. Something happened. No, he's dead. I'm sorry to tell you, he's dead. Wow. And so, that just completely put everything on just sensory overload. I don't even know how to describe it, So, so we just it took me about oh my gosh, 12 hours, 14 hours to get to even to that, get an airplane, get a flight out because night is day is night. It's all upside down.
Hmm.
And then by the time I was sitting in the morning, the next morning, after calling everybody, my daughter and all my friends and all my ex-husband and all of that, I was sitting in the airport and I saw Ben appear right in front of me, just like he would in life, with
Hmm.
his big old grin, smiling. And then he kind of faded away. So I called my ex-husband and I said, you got to call the ME. You got to do something because I think he's alive. I think he's in the refrigerator and I think he's trying to get out. You got to go do something. So I was just hysterical. So he calls and the ME, very kindly looks and says, no, I'm sorry. He's gone.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that was sort of and then, I had a 14-hour plane ride to think about everything, my life and everything.
It sounds like torture sitting
It was,
there.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was
Hmm.
torture. Yeah. And I
Hmm.
have to say, I was on Korean Airlines. I love them to this day. They were so kind and so helpful, and everything. And gosh, so but sometimes death is a doorway.
Hmm.
And for me, his death was a doorway into, oh my gosh, there really is life after death. Because I wasn't sure I really believed that before.
Hmm. So he seeing that image of him or seeing him physically there
Seeing
in
him
your
physically there. Yeah.
yeah was the start of you believing that
Yes.
there was something beyond what we know.
Exactly. And
Mm.
then the more that he was around more and more, and he was there and around me. I could feel him, I could sense him, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. And so long story short, I ended up after about 3 weeks going to a medium. So in my left brain world in Washington DC, being a judge, I didn't even know there were mediums, hadn't
Wow.
come across any, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I Googled it, as any left brain person will do, right? And
You want the science behind it, right?
with the
Yeah.
science behind it, so in up popped a list of people, and one's
Hmm.
picture was bigger than the other. And I said, well, I'll choose her.
Hmm.
Interesting enough, I went back the next day, her picture was the same size. And this is
Wow.
a way that spirit has been communicating with me ever since.
So you really sort of tapped into that. And I think that's really key because so many people kind of ignore the messages and the signs and the intuition. And I think we're always being guided. And it's so important to be able to sort of recognize those moments as they come up. So I love
Yeah.
that you saw that and took action to, take the next steps because sometimes we just feel, I think, overwhelmed that we don't even know where to start. And I can't even imagine how overwhelmed you were feeling going through, that whole journey of, losing your son and having to, continue to live, even though you were so distraught that it was something that you didn't think it was even possible. So really inspiring to see your progression. But what a shift from being a judge to practicing energy medicine and seeking out mediums. And so when you made that initial contact, through a medium, were you able to get the messages that you were seeking, or did you get
Yeah.
more than you thought you would
I
get?
got more than I thought. So it was one of those things that I could feel him around me. And I was driving to the medium and I knew he was in the car with me. And we went in to her room and I said, he's standing right there. See the candle, he's waving his hand over the candle and the candle was flickering. I said, he's right there. I can see him, but I can't hear him. Can you tell me what he's saying?
Hmm.
And so we had this wonderful session with her, and things that she told me were just in a way that he would say them, like, Mom, it is what it is. I'm here now. Everything's fine. That kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
so and messages for his sister and just things that how would anybody know? So it was really a fantastic experience. And I think I'm one of the fortunate ones because I've had this such an intense experience with my sons, because so many people say, well, I wish my loved one would get in touch with me. I wish that this would happen. I wish, so I think I was fortunate in that sense, is to have this direct um, contact with him and know that in fact he was doing fine, that he was where he wants to be, and that he was there to help me. And he really helped me through finding my way on a spiritual path that I didn't have before. I think when I was little, I had imaginary friends and those sorts of things. But I shut all that off, as many of us do when we get older. We shut that part down, and we have to make a living, and we have to be practical and all the
Hmm.
things, right? And
Responsibility, get stuck in the grind, the daily grind.
the
Yep.
daily
Hmm.
grind, children, mortgage, car payment, all those kind of things. So,
Hmm.
and I think maybe one of the things that happened with me was he was 27, my daughter was 25 and doing well. And so when he left, and I'm an only child of an only child, so I don't have a big family, a lot of responsibility. So for me, when Ben passed, it was as though everything faded away. Like nothing was real anymore. So my life as a judge, it just didn't fit anymore. Nothing fit anymore. My interests really were on spiritual things, mostly because I wanted to talk more to Ben. So I
Hmm.
can't say I had a big altruistic motive. But then as time progressed, I began to see more spirits. So, and Ben was hanging out with spirits. And so he had spirit friends. And finally, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I had all these spirits in my room. And I said, okay, that's it. No spirits in my room, except Ben. You can stay, but everybody else got to go.
Oh,
And they left.
wow. Wow, interesting. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you
And
can
then
control that.
you
Hmm.
can control that. And then, out in my hallway, and the next morning I said, okay, everybody, no spirits in my house. No, this is too weird.
Yeah,
Right. So a lot
yeah,
of times when you're open, spirits are looking for help. Sometimes they're a little bit stuck in between realms. They're stuck between earth and they haven't quite gotten to wherever you think it is, heaven,
yeah.
nirvana, whatever your philosophy. But anyway, the place where souls go for healing and transition.
Amazing. So now, when you experience these spirits, and including Ben's, did you ever feel afraid? Did you have fear of letting that in?
I didn't have fear because I think Ben was there.
Hmm.
If I had just woken up and he wasn't there, I think I would have been afraid because at that point I hadn't done a shamanic training. I wasn't very spiritual. And I think it would have totally freaked me out. I,
Yeah.
I remember even thinking when my mother and father passed, and they passed it, in the ordinary course of things. And yet I thought, oh, I hope they don't come back. I don't want to see any ghosts. But with my son, it was totally different, right? So
Hmm.
he came and he was just there and led me along the way. I really think he opened my spiritual path.
Yeah, I do believe, that everything happens for a reason, and as difficult and challenging as it can be, we are guided, and there is a purpose behind it all. So I think it's extraordinary that you were able to, see Ben and find the comfort that he is okay, and in fact,
Yeah,
even more than okay,
right.
right? And so I think a lot of people are, if they just had that knowledge of that their loved one is in a better place, they can move forward in a way that serves them on this planet, on this earth, and having that joy and happiness come back to life. Because I know for you, you talked about being so, in the depths of despair, like in the heart of that you didn't want to live anymore. So let's talk about that. And what was the shift for you that you recognized that, well, wait a second, I can move forward despite the intense pain that you were feeling?
So right after he died, then my daughter was around for a really long time and stayed with me, and then she had an opportunity to go to Guatemala. She's an engineer to do some volunteer work with hospitals and things. And I said, no, you need to go. You need to go. And
Mm,
I'm fine, right? Fine, whatever fine is, but I'm
mm,
fine. I'm fine. I'm good,
mm,
And I was trying to work, right? So I was trying to go into work. I was trying desperately to keep everything kind of in a container. So I didn't want to be home alone too much. And, work I could kind of was familiar. And there's a lot of pressure, as jobs have to get back to it.
mm,
All these things are scheduled, hearings are scheduled, decisions are scheduled. You got to get to it. And so here I am trying desperately to hold on. And then the holidays hit. And there's a lot of time off during the holidays, right? And so I really just got in the pits of despair and my heating system wasn't working. So I called the guy in and he said, oh, you have to put a new heating system right away. This is dangerous levels of CO2. In fact, you need to go to a hotel and stay. And I thought to myself, oh, what an opportunity. I'm just going to stay here. And then I had this idea that I've had this idea. Oh, I'm going to die tonight. This is fantastic. And my daughter won't feel bad because it's not like I committed suicide. It's like that was this is what goes on in your mind when you're
Wow.
really out of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking, so it's the furnace. So she won't feel bad. It's not like I wanted to leave her. And then my little dog will all go to, he and I'll go together. And then I woke up the next morning.
Wow. Wow.
And
So
I
you
thought,
actually did stay. Wow.
yeah, I
Okay.
actually
Mm.
did. Oh, yeah, I stayed for several weeks.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, but when I woke up the next morning, and I really felt like bait and switch, I thought I was going, checking out, and here I am. I had this idea. I had to get together 16 parcels of my son's clothes and bedding and food and money to take to this tent city that was near my office. So it was 16. I had to get 16. So all day I'm like frantically getting this together, shoving it into my car, up to the ceiling, everywhere with all kinds of things, and drove to the tent city. And don't you know, there were 16 tents.
Wow, the synchronicity, is extraordinary, right? And so do you feel like that was, a message,
Yeah,
from
that was
Ben?
Ben saying,
Hmm.
hey, let's make the best of this we can. I'm right here with you. And let's not just have a shrine that's useless. Let's make my life mean something. Let's make my things mean something.
Mm.
And so that was sort of this journey of a step by step out of the pits of despair, and then continuing to explore spiritual things until finally I got referred to an evolutionary astrologer who told me that my soul had chosen the mystical path, Neptune instead of Uranus, shame, blame, and guilt. And I thought, mystical path. I wasn't even sure what that meant. What
Wow.
does that mean exactly? And he said a woman that I had a similar reading became a shaman. And I'm like, a shaman in the 20, whatever date it was. And so, of course, I get off and I Google it, and I found the four winds. And 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to shaman school.
Wow. This is incredible. I mean, so from judge to shaman and
Right.
everything in between, quite the remarkable, extraordinary transmutation of that despair and the grief, which is so inspiring. So for all the listeners out there right now and the viewers who are experiencing, something similar, or you're going through any sort of a challenge, know that you will get through this. Life is a cycle. Remember that, right? When we're in those low points, we will get back to those highs. And I know it can be so challenging. And, I wish that you didn't have to go through those experiences, but they do, impart something within us that makes us better for it. And it may take a little while, right? But we certainly can move forward in a way that serves us. So we're going to take a break here on the Mindset Mentor, and we will be back with more of Living Grieving by Karen V. Johnson, a remarkable book sharing her journey of losing her son Ben at the age of 27 to a heroin overdose, and not even realizing that he even took drugs, to not having him here, and what her life was like and how she was able to transform it for the betterment of everyone. So stay tuned, and we'll be back here on Sauga 960. Welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. This is your mindset workout for today. And we are helping you to understand the process of grief. My guest on today's show is Karen V. Johnson. She is the author of Living Grieving. The subtitle is Using Energy Medicine to Alchemize Grief and Loss. Now, grief doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear, but what can we do with it? So, Karen, we're going to pick up the conversation. You talk about how grief is energy, and let's dive into some of the practices that we can understand, and so that we can transmute the grief and the despair that we are experiencing, because certainly it's not an overnight process when you're experiencing that type of grief.
No, for sure. Yeah. So we know that other big events in life, like marriage and parenthood, are transformational, life transformational. But somehow in our culture, we've lost touch with the transformational wisdom of grief and
Mm-hmm.
those who are grieving. And because we associate it with sadness and despair and hopelessness. And sometimes, there's lots of books and lots of people that will tell you, okay, you need to go on a date or you need to go to a movie, all the things you need to do in this physical realm to resolve it so that you get out of being stuck in your grief. But for me, I traveled the world for a year, 2.5 years, all over the world, talking to shamans and priests
Mm-hmm.
and Sufi masters and all sorts of people of trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand grief and loss. And what came to me is that our journey is really a spiritual journey. And so I have 16 practices in my book for people to take this journey. And it's a medicine wheel journey. It doesn't have to be a medicine wheel, but it is a journey. It's a circle. We begin with the South, becoming unstuck. We go to the West, becoming lighter. Then we have rebirth. And then here we are, at the end of our journey. So each direction has 4 practices associated with it. And so we do it I ask people to do it in a ceremonial way. And I'm having a class that's starting July 10th. And I take people all around the wheel and we do it in ceremony because it engages a different part of our brain. When we try to move things at the physical level, it's heavy, 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 like a boulder, like a sack, everything is heavy. It's hard to do. But when we up level to our neocortex, our ceremonial brain, things move like a feather in the breeze. And so, most people know when they go into a church or they go into a temple and they see a candle to be lit, they'll go over and they'll light the candle, even if they're not a member of that religion, right? They'll light a candle for someone. So we know that we're familiar with fire and
Mm-hmm.
we're familiar with smoke and taking our prayers to the heavens, to wherever they need to go.
And ritual as well.
And
Mm-hmm.
ritual. Yeah. And so that's what I'm asking people to do, is sit and ask themselves questions like, who are you judging? Who's judging you? Right? Ram Dass has such a beautiful description of when we go into the forest, we look at the trees, and some trees are tall and some trees are small and some have been broken and some are this and some are that. So we don't judge them. We say, oh, look, they're all trying to get to the light. But
Mm-hmm.
people, as soon as people are judging, mind comes in. And so if you could just write down with radical honesty, so if people have a pen and a paper and they can write down with radical honesty, who's judging? Maybe you're judging your loved one. I know I was pretty mad at Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're judging yourself. I should have done this, should have done that. And so taking that to the fire, and I say radical honesty because people are going to burn their lists. So this isn't a journal that somebody's going to find and say, I can't believe you said that about me. I supported you all I could and blah, blah, all these kind of things. No, this is just you. This is your own personal journey. You can write anything down.
It's such a release to get it out onto paper,
It
because we can get
is.
so overwhelmed by all the thoughts going on, in the mind, that it's hard to focus. And when we can at least get it down on paper, it can kind of make that initial shift. And then the ritual of actually burning it, it's like it's time to release it. And I think that's so beautiful. Everybody can relate to that. And of course, I mean, you're asking the question of, who are you judging? Oh yeah, I mean, I can judge people. I judge myself, and
Right.
have to catch myself, right, and say okay, and recognize that, hey, this is not the best. This is not the best choice in this moment, right? But I think it is important to be able to become aware, to tap into the self, and to sometimes just become the observer. When you can become the observer, then you see with much greater clarity. Did you find that you became the observer in your own life?
Oh yeah. I mean, once you get in touch with that observer within, and so there's many different practices, non-doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of times we keep ourselves busy, 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 right? And so that we don't have to look at our uncomfortable emotions. So sometimes the practice is to sit, right? Some people meditate, some people sit in silence, but to sit and allow those uncomfortable emotions to come through, because
Mm-hmm.
the more we try to stamp them down, we become like a pot, like a double boiler ready to explode.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to
Absolutely.
let things out and we want to get in touch with those uncomfortable emotions and allow ourselves to feel. We can't just stop feeling what's uncomfortable, then we stop feeling anything.
Yeah. So I want to dive into that just a little bit deeper in your own experience of, experiencing those emotions and not suppressing them. Were you worried that you wouldn't get through it? Because I think a lot of people are so fearful of letting that come up because they just don't know how they're ever going to be able to manage that type of
Oh, I
emotion.
totally get it. So some people go inside their homes, right? They just stay in. They stop socializing because we know the bereaved. We know we make people uncomfortable, and it's sort of like, well, let's not talk about that. Let's have a good time. What? My son's death. You want me to just have a good time and not talk about that, not think about that, right? So
Mm.
I used to tell people, well, just think of me as a zombie. I only have half a heart. And zombies don't go to lunch and zombies don't go to dinner and zombies stay in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah, we get really stuck in our despair and hopelessness. So we want to find a way to move that a little bit and get in touch with what's keeping us stuck. We're all different. It might be an old story that you're telling yourself. I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have made them go to the doctor. I hear that a lot. Should have made them go to the doctor. Should have made them do this, as if we have control, right?
Mm.
Like we control the world. We're so egocentric, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we think that everything revolves around us. And so we are the fault of all of it. And so looking at that too, is that really true?
Well, that's interesting because I think it's almost like a relief to know that we don't control everything in the world because that's a lot of pressure, right? If you think about it. So
Right.
it's kind of a reprieve. And there's something that you had mentioned, in your book as well that, and obviously being a judge, being in criminal law for 30 years, you had a huge responsibility and you had all talked about always, grabbing the brass ring, right? And
Right.
success. What else can I do? What else can you? Very, very busy and extremely successful, in what you were doing. But then, there was no time left for your life, and it's like you kind of, abandoned who you were, at your core, just because you wanted to keep busy doing things.
Yeah, for sure. I always say I don't remember my 40s. I just don't remember. It was a big blur. We talk about the sandwich generation. So we have our young kids and we have our elderly parents and we have full-time jobs and everything we do. And juggling all that takes every bit of attention, every bit of emotion, every bit of energy that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really nothing much left. And so 10 years, I lost it. And I think many people are sort of like that, going through the motions every day, not wanting to look at it too carefully because, ooh, it's scary on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
And so, one thing again, you were talking about juggling those balls, and then in life, trying to control everything. You don't want those balls to drop, so you're constantly juggling those balls. But you also talked about how there was a little bit of a relief in a sense because the worst thing happened. Your son died, and so a little bit of that pressure of having to constantly do and be and worried was eliminated.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes, we call it grief relief. And
Mm.
people feel very guilty about that. It's like, oh my gosh, but someone who's been a caregiver for a really long time, for example, and then the person dies, and there's a certain relief, like you got your life back, and yet you feel terrible about it. So we're constantly struggling with that kind of grief relief. And there is a certain, from people that have children that are struggling with addiction and lost to opioids, their life is just one fear after another. When is it going to happen? When are they going to are they going to get the Narcan in time? Are they going to get fentanyl? Are they going to, so it's this constant. I mean, I think we become almost chronically hyper and
Mm.
fearful and worried. And so when it finally happens, oh my gosh, you think, well, no more worrying about when.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that feels such a terrible thing today to say. And so I always say there's no win in grieving. So you either grieve too hard and too long, and someone says, oh, she really needs medicine. She needs a psychiatrist, or you don't grieve long enough by somebody's standards.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, she didn't care. So we might as well go on our own journey. And grief is a journey. And if anybody takes anything back away from this talk or from my book, is that grief is a journey, and it's your own journey, and it's going to take as long as it takes you. And you don't have to be stuck in your journey. There are things that you can do to find out where it is, what it is that's really touching your heart, keeping you from having any energy to go forward. And that's what we want to get in touch with, that energy of grief to go forward, to create a new life out of the ashes of the old one that honors our loved ones. So we're not leaving them behind, we're not forgetting them, and our staying stuck and being miserable doesn't help them either. We kind of are holding on to their kite string on the other side. So as we begin to move that energy and begin to create new lives out of the ashes of the old one, they are freer on the other side to do what they need to do. And that's the lesson I think that Ben shared so beautifully with me, and that I want to share with people.
Well, that's beautiful. I know a lot of people right now are, so grateful that you are so open and vulnerable to share your story and experience, and not worry about, being judged and what others are going to think. You talked a lot about, in your book, that, people, it's not, they're uncomfortable, right, with the bereavement process. And it's so important that, you honor yourself, and you were just going to, grieve the way that you saw fit. And you went on this incredible journey. You literally sold your house. You went on a journey, like literally and metaphorically, for
Yep.
2.5 years. So let's talk about that. And what was the deciding factor for you that allowed that for you to take that step?
So about a year and a half or so after my son passed, I'd been doing a lot of spiritual things. I ended up beginning with the four winds, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is it. This makes sense to me, this energy medicine. And it makes sense about this journey. And I went around the wheel myself to heal my own wounds. And then at the end, I just thought, I realized I can't live this life as a judge and as a shaman. It's too far apart. Somebody's eventually going to find out and say, oh, I can see that in the Washington Post, right? Something, really terrible about that. I have to choose. And I want to get in touch with, what did I really want? Sometimes we forget to ask ourselves. We get so lost in what we had to do to survive and to, get the goodies in life and all those kind of things. We lost track of what maybe we wanted when we were young. And what I wanted was to travel the world and be an anthropologist or an archaeologist. And my parents talked me out of it. That's not for a girl. This is the 50s. So
Yes.
we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have Zoom and all these kind of things that we really enjoy now. And so, I said, okay, I'm going to go to law school and I'll forget about that. And so I forgot about it for many years. And so when I was sitting with myself and saying, if I could do anything, not worry about money, not worry about people, not worry about family, not worry about, what would I do? I was like, I would travel. I would travel the world. And I would try to figure out this thing about grief. Right. And so that's what I did. I sold everything, gave it away. No car, imagine me, no car, no mortgage, no nothing, two
Wow.
suitcases and my laptop. Right.
Certainly brave, very brave. And it's not
Yeah.
something that, many people would actually have the courage to do and the strength to do.
Yeah. And so, but I feel like that was my mission, to figure
Hmm.
these things out so I could bring it back. Part of the journey, the hero's journey, or the shero's journey, I like to call it,
Hmm.
is bringing home the assets, bringing home everything that you learned in your journey. And so that was the book. I originally thought the book was going to be a blog. Oh, here's my travel journey. And then it became deeper and deeper and deeper. And it turned into a book. And I was really fortunate that Hay House picked it up. So it was fantastic. The journey has been just amazing. And to be able to teach people and have clients and be able to help them heal, there's so many different kinds of grief and loss. There's so many different doorways. There's old loss and grief. People haven't gotten over someone that they lost years and years and years ago, and that's
Yeah.
stuck in their system, and that energy can harden and make us sick. So a lot of people who are ill with autoimmune and cancer and different things, if I go back, I'm going to find unresolved grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that for you, you also experienced, the physical signs of grief trapped in the body, which we will talk about when we come back after this break. You're listening to The Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar, and my special guest today is Karen V. Johnson. She is the author of Living Grieving, an incredible journey, so beautifully written. It's the subtitle is Using Energy Medicine to Alchemize Grief and Loss. And yes, you can alchemize it. You can transmute it so that it can serve you moving forward in a way that honors you and your loved one that you have lost, or any loss that you're experiencing. Again, because it's not limited to a person. It could be a job and your identity you may have associated with your job, and all of a sudden, when that's no longer in your life, it can be really hard to move forward because you feel stuck and overwhelmed. We're going to help you get unstuck here on the Mindset Mentor. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. Yeah, I'm Tania Kolar, helping you optimize your mindset and really cultivate a life you love. And we talked about how it can be very difficult to, try to have a life that you love when you're so overwhelmed with, emotions like despair and grief, which can be so immobilizing. And in fact, it can really start to create a lot of physical ailments in the body, because our body is always giving us a signal, right? It's saying, hey, look at this, pay attention. And when we don't pay attention, it really starts to add up, right? So my guest today is Karen V. Johnson, who has written an incredible book called Living Grieving. She experienced, her 27-year-old son, Ben, died of a heroin overdose. And, going from the shock of that, I mean, not even knowing that he had any sort of drug issues, to not having him around anymore, she was able to transmute the energy, the dark energy of grief and despair, and bring some illumination and some light to enjoy life and to move forward. So Karen, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and I'd love to continue the conversation about how, our emotions can be obviously correlated into physical pain in the body. And you were experiencing a point where you had chronic bronchitis. And tell us about that and the connection to the emotional aspect.
Yeah. So after my son passed, as I was traveling and everything, I had this chronic bronchitis that I couldn't get rid of. And it would come back and it would just wipe me out, and over and over again. And so finally, I traveled so many different places, but I did travel to John of God, to the casa there, and there's many beautiful entities and energies. As I say in my book, I'm not making a case that
Mm-hmm.
for John of God, who has since been convicted of many horrible offenses, but
Mm-hmm.
the place itself is very sacred. And one thing I found out from one of the people that just walked up to me, I didn't know them, they didn't know me, and said, "Your bronchitis is due to grief. That's where you're carrying your grief."
Mm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, how did she know? How could that person know? And it really is true during that process. And finally, we never get over grief.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we get knocked out by grief over and over again. But you learn to create a new life and a more meaningful life. So that's when I got to that. And once I really knew that Ben was truly in a better place and he was truly happy, I was able to say, okay, it's not the same as having him in physical form. It's not. I can't hug him. I can't hold him. I can still get very tearful on anniversaries and death
Mm-hmm.
days and those kind of things. However, I know that he's really happy. And I know that he's happier than he was when he was here. And so that gives me a lot of comfort. And
Beautiful.
and one of the practices that's in the east direction of the medicine wheel that I love to talk about is indigenous alchemy. So indigenous alchemy, what does that mean? So indigenous, native, or inherent, alchemy, desired for change, for transformation. So what if we as humans are hardwired for transformation? And what if by staying stuck and refusing to move and creating a shrine in our home or their bedroom and not moving on at all and not changing anything, what if that stuck energy really makes us sick? What if we're hardwired for change and we're hardwired for seeing death in a very different way, seeing it just as a doorway, and
Mm.
knowing that there is more on the other side, this idea of eternal slumber. My son tells me I'm not slumbering. I'm doing all kind of fun stuff over here, right?
Well, speaking of fun stuff, you talk about ziplining in your
Yes.
book, right? Let's talk
Yeah.
about that for someone who wasn't keen on diving in at first. You kind of
No,
changed.
no, I
Yeah.
did not want to go zip
Mhm.
lining. I was in
Mhm.
Costa Rica, and everybody else, they were going to zip line. I'm like, oh, I've had a hip replacement. No, I'm not going to do this. Too dangerous. I was just overcome by this desire to zip line when I got there. And I knew that Ben was right there with me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So here I am on the zip line. I'm hanging upside down. I'm doing all kind of crazy stuff. And I'm like, Ben, remember, I'm 66 years old. I'm not you. I know you're experiencing this through me, but I would like to live through this.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, I love that. Wow. But
So,
it's so interesting that you immediately knew that it was
yeah.
Ben.
Oh,
Hmm.
yeah. I just
Hmm.
knew. I know how he feels and how he communicates. And I think our loved ones do communicate. It's just sometimes we're not open to it, and especially if we say, like I did with my parents, oh, no, no, no ghosts for me, thanks. Right.
Hmm.
So we
Hmm.
kind of shut down. But if we're open to it, maybe it's the wind chime blowing when there's no wind. Maybe it's a butterfly that keeps coming back and spinning around your head. Or maybe, so they all have their unique ways of trying to catch our attention in this physical realm while they're not in this physical realm. So it's a little bit of translation. And
Hmm.
so I always tell people, just be open to it and say, show me in a way that I can understand.
I
Show
love
me
it.
in a way I can understand.
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, you talked about, the energy and transmuting that energy. So, what were some of the techniques that you used to shift your energy?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So, well, for one thing, all of these exercises are things that I learned in the Four Winds class. So they're associated with the medicine wheel.
Hmm.
And so doing those exercises and actually with the intention. So intention is everything. The intention to release and to open up into something new.
Mm.
So, that's the metaphor for breathing. And it's a metaphor for shamanic work because we're releasing heavy energies and opening up to lighter ones. So, as we breathe, we bring in fresh air, we breathe out stale air. So, that process and actually living that process is something most people don't even think about. We don't do it. We don't consider these sorts of things. It's a little bit different for our culture, many different cultures. So we get caught trapped in this everyday world and we're shut
Hmm.
off from these other ways of thinking, believing, being, doing, seeing. And getting back in touch with that is a way for us to replenish our soul, to move on, to experience something beyond our ordinary reality, because the ordinary reality can be very heavy.
Hmm.
So that's where we want to go. We want to, yeah.
Yeah, have set the intention, so have that willingness, to again release some of that, because it can be scary, or sometimes to release it, but it can also be something that we hold on to because it's familiar, and
Yes.
or we sometimes feel that if we are, not grieving, then it's not showing, how much we love that person. But in
Exactly.
fact, that's not, doesn't have to be that way. It's what we choose to do, and to of course, you have to honor where you're at, and if that's where you're at, that's okay. Nothing is wrong the way that you're grieving, but there is a way to move forward in an empowering way, so that you can experience happiness and bliss and joy. I
Yeah.
know when my mother passed away, my father was, in deep grief, married for almost 50 years, right? And so love of his life no longer, there. And I remember getting into the car with him once, and he didn't turn the radio on, and he had said that, oh, he hasn't put the radio on for an entire year. And
Mm.
then I realized, and what he said was because he was honoring my mother, the passing of my mother. So he felt he couldn't even experience the joy of music because she was not there. And that to me, I was like, oh, that's actually really sad. And I'm sorry that he felt that he had to deprive himself of even a little bit of happiness,
Yeah.
to honor my mom. But it's something that I think a lot of people do. Or you experience anything negative or bad in life, and you feel like, oh, well, I shouldn't, or I don't have the right to enjoy myself. But
Right.
you do, and your loved one would want you to be happy and move forward, with joy.
Yeah. So, when you think about the brain and the neural networks,
Mm-hmm.
when we really are stuck in our grief and despair and hopelessness, we're digging those pathways deeper and deeper and deeper. So, what I like to have people do, and it's one of the practices in the book, is the practice of beauty. I like to have them write practice beauty on a piece of paper
Mm-hmm.
and put it on their refrigerator. And their homework is to do one thing every day that makes them happy, that
Hmm.
brings them joy, because we get out of the habit of it. And as we get out of the habit and we keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper our those negative pathways, then that's where we're stuck. We're stuck in this rut. So we want to open up new ways. So whether it's
Mm-hmm.
a flower, listening to music, it doesn't have to be anything big. Maybe going to an art show, maybe seeing a sunset, whatever it is, if you get in touch with those things that used to bring you beauty and joy into your life, with the concept that, yes, our loved ones want this for us.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, as we're releasing, as we're beginning to heal and to go through our lives, they too are healing, and they too are free to do what they need to do on the other side instead
Oh,
of getting stuck.
yeah, I love that. And I think that it's important to recognize that, obviously if you're experiencing deep grief, you're not going to be walking around, smiling from ear to ear 24/7. It's not reality. It's not going to happen, but you can find joy in those small moments. Could be just, a couple of moments here and there to practice that beauty, as you say, to remember that, yes, you can incorporate that and then build that habit, strengthen those neural networks. As they say, thoughts that fire together wire together. And when you have those negative thoughts and you're stuck in that negative pattern of thinking, the myelin sheath around those networks, strengthen, and you're going to get more of what you're focusing on. And I
Yeah.
think it's great to make that shift. So thank you for, bringing that awareness.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you said something that's so important too, is like people have to start where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're really fresh and you're just in the beginning throes of grief, this might not be the time to do any really deep work.
Mm-hmm.
But as time goes on and you say to yourself, wow, I am really stuck. I feel really hopeless, and life feels very heavy. Maybe it's time to look at things a little bit and say, how can I lighten this up a little bit? How can I be reborn into a life that honors my loved one? How can I make something meaningful out of what happened instead of just saying it happened? Like, how many times have you heard people say, oh, she never recovered, he never
Mm-hmm.
recovered? And we are asked to bear the unbearable. And it does get touch something in us deeper, deep inside, and it makes us deeper and more compassionate and more open people. And so grief has, I mean, if once you're touched by grief, you're really not the same anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's like once you have a child, you're not the same anymore. Once you get married, you're not the same anymore. It's not all about you. And grief, we try so hard. Oh, that hasn't touched me yet. Oh, I hope I never. But we all know that eventually somebody around us is going to pass. Something
Yeah.
is going to touch us in that way. And so um, just realizing that grief has a beauty and an energy of its own, and that we can learn from, yes, even from grief, even from
Mm-hmm.
despair.
Yeah, and sometimes it's grieving the loss of your identity, before that traumatic experience happened. That's a form of grief as well. And so we don't have a lot of time left. So I want to ask you, Karen, what is the biggest lesson, the meaning that you have discovered through the loss of your son?
Yeah, so the way that's a big one. That's that grief is this big journey, and that every once in a while, no matter how much work we do, we're just going to get knocked over by a wave of grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to happen. I got knocked over at the 5 year point, even though I had done tons of work. So the difference, though, is I didn't stay knocked over. I had tools, and I had a way to go back and say, okay, what is this right now? What is this wave about? And how can I deal with that? And so it's always looking for tools and looking for ways so that we don't have to stay in this hopelessness and place of despair. A lot of people are
Mm-hmm.
grieving. Young people are grieving the environment.
Well,
The biggest seventh extinction event. So
mm-hmm.
we're in a major extinction event, climate, everything. So people are grieving loss of many, many, many different kinds.
Yeah, even the pandemic created a lot of grief, over the change and the shift, and people, having to struggle to figure things out and to, live in isolation. A lot of challenges. So I think there's so many wonderful tools, as you talked about, in your book that the listeners and the viewers can benefit from. So again, the title of Karen's book is Living Grieving, and it's using energy medicine to alchemize grief and loss, because yes, you can transmute that energy, and again, use that loss in a way that's going to serve you in the future. Now, it may take some time, of course. Remember, the grieving process is exactly that. It is a process. It does not happen overnight. And Karen so beautifully shares, her journey, so that, she can help other people on a similar journey, no matter what type of grief you're experiencing, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a relationship, a job. We all have experienced some form of grief. And if you haven't, then, you will at some point. It's just part of human biology, and we want to make sure that you optimize your mindset. So, let's do what we can to help each other out, or to help out a loved one. So Karen, I want to say thank you so much for being here on the Mindset Mentor today. You've brought a lot of illumination to some really dark moments for a lot of people, and it's so beautiful to see that you are now doing what you love on a spiritual path that started, with the death of your son Ben.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And
Beautiful.
you can, if anybody wants to find me, they can find me at karenjohnson.net.
Wonderful. So absolutely check that out, karenjohnson.net. Make sure you pick up a copy of her book for you or a loved one, Living Grieving. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Mindset Mentor today. And let's continue our mindset workout. Join me Thursdays at 3 p.m. and enjoy an extraordinary day.